Hey everyone, it's ZLR here. I have to re-record the intro for this because for some reason my first video for the thing got deleted, so I have to go through the Patriots and Jets game all over again too. But we had the Jets winning 24-3. Jacoby Brissett 12 completions at 18 attempts for 98 yards, and Drake May came into the game too, have 4 completions for uh from 8 attempts, 22 yards. Antonio Gibson had 5 carries, 29 yards. Ramondre Stevenson had 6 carries for 23 yards. Drake May had 2 carries for 12 yards. Demario Douglas had 1 carry for 9 yards. And Michael Hasty, 1 carry for 5 yards. Demario Douglas had 7 receptions for 69 yards. Austin Hooper had 1 reception for 19 yards. Jalen Polk had 2 receptions, 13 yards. Hunter Henry had 2 receptions for 9 yards. Antonio Gibson had 3 receptions, 8 yards. And Kayshon Boutte had 1 reception for 2 yards. Aaron Rodgers had 27 completions out of 35 attempts for 281 yards and 2 touchdowns. We also had Braylon Allen with 11 carries, 55 yards. Brees Hall, 16 carries, 54 yards, and a touchdown. Aaron Rodgers, 3 carries, 18 yards. And also Isaiah Davis with 3 carries for 6 yards. Tyler Conklin had 5 receptions, 93 yards. Alan Lazard had 3 receptions, 48 yards, and a touchdown. Mike Williams had 3 receptions, 34 yards. Garrett Wilson had 5 receptions for 33 yards and a touchdown. We had Brees Hall, 4 receptions, for 29 yards. Xavier Gibson, 2 receptions for 16 yards. We had Jeremy Ruckert with 2 receptions for 15 yards, and Braylon Allen with 3 receptions for 13 yards. Then we had the Giants and the Browns, with the Giants winning that one 21-15. We had Daniel Jones completing 24 passes out of 34 attempts for 236 yards and 2 touchdowns. Malik Neighbors attempted a pass but didn't complete one. We also had Devin Singletary, 16 carries, 65 yards, and a touchdown. Uh, Tyrone Tracy Jr. had 5 carries for 23 yards. Daniel Jones had 8 carries for 20 yards. Malik Neighbors had 2 carries for 4 yards. And Eric Gray had a carry but didn't gain anything out of it. We also had Malik Neighbors, 8 receptions, 78 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Wan'Dale Robinson with 7 receptions, 61 yards. Devin Singletary, 4 receptions, 43 yards. Tyrone Tracy Jr., 2 receptions for 17 yards. Daniel Bellinger with 1 reception for 17 yards. We also had Theo Johnson with 1 reception for 13 yards. And Darius Slayton with 1 reception for 7 yards. And for the Browns side of things, we had Deshaun Watson completing 21 passes out of 37 attempts, 196 yards, and 2 touchdowns. This, don't ask me why I said 21%. Then we also had Jerome Ford with 10 carries, 37 yards. Deshaun Watson with 4 carries for 26 yards. Donta Foreman with 2 carries for 5 yards. And Jameis Winston with 2 carries for 1 yard. We had Amari Cooper with, I don't know why I said Austin, 7 receptions, 86 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Jerome Ford had 3 receptions for 33 yards. Jordan Atkins had 4 receptions for 29 yards. Jerry Jeudy had 4 receptions for 27 yards. Elijah Moore had 2 receptions for 17 yards. And Cedric Tillman had 1 reception for 4 yards. Then we had the Eagles and the Saints game where the Eagles won 15-12. We had Jalen Hurts completing 29 of his passes out of 38 attempts 311 yards and a interception. We had Saquon Barkley carry the ball 17 times for 147 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jalen Hurts had 8 carries, 25 yards. Dallas Goedert, 10 receptions, 170 yards. Devonta Smith had 7 receptions for 79 yards. Paris Campbell had 2 receptions for 13 yards. Kenneth Gainwell had 2 receptions for 12 yards. We had Britton Covey with 1 reception, 11 yards. Saquon Barkley had 4 receptions for 9 yards. We had Johnny Wilson with 1 reception, 9 yards. And Jahan Dotson with 2 receptions for 8 yards. Derek Carr had 14 completions out of 25 attempts for 142 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. We had Alvin Kamara, 26 carries for 87 yards. Derek Carr had 2 carries for 3 yards. And Jamal Williams carried it once but got negative yardage out of that with negative 1 yard. We also had Chris Olave, 6 receptions, 86 yards, and a touchdown. Alvin Kamara had 3 receptions for 40 yards. Mason Tipton, 2 receptions for 11 yards. Cedric Wilson Jr. with 1 reception, 3 yards. Foster Moranu with 1 reception for 2 yards. And Jamal Williams had a reception but didn't gain anything out of it. Then we had the Texans and the Vikings, with the Vikings winning this one 34-7. A really, really bad game for the Texans. We had CJ Stroud, 20 completions out of 31 attempts, 215 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. We also had Davis Mills with 7 completions out of 12 attempts for 79 yards. And Stephon Diggs even completed a pass for 13 yards out of 1 attempt. We also had Cam Akers with 9 carries, 21 yards. CJ Stroud had 3 carries for 12 yards. JJ Taylor had 1 carry for 3 yards. And British Brooks had 1 carry for 2 yards. Kind of weird that there's 2 guys in the NFL named Britton. Stephon Diggs, 10 receptions, 94 yards. Nico Collins, 4 receptions, 86 yards. Tank Dell, 5 receptions, 62 yards. Dare Ungobale, or Dare Ogumbale. I can't say that fast. 2 receptions, 28 yards. Then we had Robert Woods, 2 receptions, 18 yards. Dalton Schultz, 2 receptions for 11 yards. Cam Akers, 1 reception for 8 yards and a touchdown. We also had JJ Taylor catch the ball twice, but didn't gain anything really out of it. Then we had Sam Darnold, who's been playing really good. 17 completions out of 28 attempts, 181 yards, and 4 touchdowns. We had Aaron Jones, 19 carries for 102 yards. Ty Chandler, 7 carries, 13 yards. Jalen Naylor with 1 carry for 3 yards. And Nick Mullins carried the ball once but didn't get anything really out of it. And now my phone's acting slow as shit. Why does it do this? Hate it when it does that. Alright, so we also had Justin Jefferson, 6 receptions, 81 yards and a touchdown. Aaron Jones had 5 receptions, 46 yards and a touchdown. Jalen Naylor had 3 receptions for 31 yards and a touchdown. Brandon Powell had 1 reception for 13 yards. We also had Trent Sherfield Sr. with 1 reception for 8 yards. And Johnny Munt with 1 reception, 2 yards, and a touchdown. Then we had the Broncos and the Buccaneers, with the Broncos winning it 26-7. Another bad game, but this time for the Buccaneers. we had Bo Nix, 25 completions out of 36 attempts for 216 yards. Tyler Beatty with 9 carries for 70 yards. Bo Nix with 9 carries, 47 yards, and a touchdown. Uh, Javonte Williams with 5 carries for 12 yards. And Jaleel McLaughlin with 5 carries, 7 yards, and 1 touchdown. I am so out of it today. Not feeling too great. Cortland Sutton, 7 receptions, 68 yards. Lil Jordan Humphrey with 6 receptions, 37 yards. We had Josh Reynolds with 2 receptions, 36 yards. Javonte Williams with 4 receptions, 29 yards. We had Adam Trotman with 1 reception, 13 yards. We also had Troy Franklin with 2 receptions for 11 yards. Marvin Mims with 1 reception, 9 yards. Jaleel McLaughlin with 1 reception, 7 yards. And Nate Adkins with 1 reception, 6 yards. For the Buccaneers side of things, we had Baker Mayfield completing 25 passes out of 33 attempts, 163 yards, a touchdown, and 8 interception. We also had Bucky Irving with 9 carries, 70 yards. We have Rachaad White with 6 carries, 17 yards. And also we had Sean Tucker with 1 carry, 4 yards. Chris Godwin had 6 receptions for 53 yards and a touchdown. Cade Otton had 7 receptions for 47 yards. We had Rachaad White, 5 receptions, 18 yards. Mike Evans, 2 receptions, 17 yards. Bucky Irving, 3 receptions, 14 yards. Payne Durham with Durham. I don't even know at this point. 1 reception, 8 yards. And Jalen McMillan with 1 reception for 6 yards. Then we had the Malik Willis revenge game as the Packers won 30-14 against the friggin' Titans. We had Malik Willis, 13 completions out of 19 attempts, 202 yards and a touchdown, and also had 6 carries for 73 yards and a touchdown. We also had Emmanuel Wilson with, oh my freaking Christ. Now my phone's just acting weird. 12 carries, 50 yards. Josh Jacobs had 14 carries for 43 yards. Jaden Reed had 2 carries for 19 yards. And Chris Brooks had 3 carries for 3 yards. We also had Christian Watson, 2 receptions, 67 yards. Jaden Reed, 4 receptions, 50 yards. Emmanuel Wilson, 2 receptions, 35 yards, and a touchdown. Tucker Kraft, 2 receptions for 24 yards. Romeo Doubs with 1 reception, 18 yards. Josh Jacobs with 1 reception for 5 yards. And Luke Musgrave with 1 reception for 3 yards. And for the Titans side of things, we have Will Levis, the Mayo Man himself, with 26 completions out of 34 attempts for 260 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. We also had Tony Pollard with 6 carries, 14 yards. Will Levis carried the ball 3 times for 12 yards. And Tyjae Spears had 2 carries for 7 yards. We had DeAndre Hopkins with 6 receptions, 73 yards, and a touchdown. Tyjae Spears had 4 receptions, 54 yards. Josh Weil had 4 receptions, 43 yards. Tyler Boyd, 3 receptions, 33 yards. Tony Pollard, 3 receptions, 15 yards. Oh no, this is the guy that I keep on friggin' messing up his name. Chig Okonkwo I'm just gonna call him. 2 receptions, 15 yards. Nick Vannett with 2 receptions, 9 yards, and a touchdown. We also had Traylon Burks with 1 reception, 9 yards, as well as Calvin Ridley with 1 reception for 9 yards. Then we had the Chicago Bears and the Indianapolis Colts, with the Colts win at 21-16. We had Caleb Williams completing 33 out of 52 of his passes for 363 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. We also had Roschon Johnson with 8 carries, 30 yards. DeAndre Swift with 13 carries for 20 yards. Khalil Herbert with 4 carries, 9 yards. Caleb Williams had 1 carry for 8 yards. Rome Odunze had 1 carry for 2 yards. DJ Moore had a carry but lost 6 yards because of it. Rome Odunze also had 6 receptions, 112 yards, and a touchdown. Cole Kmet had 10 receptions, 97 yards, and a touchdown. DJ Moore had 8 receptions for 78 yards. Roschon Johnson had 4 receptions for 32 yards. We had DeAndre Carter with 3 receptions for 22 yards. DeAndre Swift had 2 receptions for 22 yards. And for the Colts side of things, we had Anthony Richardson, 10 completions out of 20 attempts for 167 yards and 2 interceptions. Jonathan Taylor, 23 carries, 110 yards, and a touchdown. Anthony Richardson, 8 carries for 24 yards. And Trey Sermon with 2 carries, 16 yards, and a touchdown. Then we had Alec Pierce with 1 reception, 44 yards. We had Kylan Granson with 1 reception, 40 yards. Michael Pittman Jr., 4 receptions for 36 yards. Jonathan Taylor had 1 reception for 25 yards. And Josh Downs had 3 receptions for 22 yards. Then we had the Chargers and the Steelers going at it, with the Steelers winning 20-10. We had Justin Herbert, 12 completions out of 18 attempts for 125 yards and a touchdown. And Tyler Heinicke with 2 completions out of 2 attempts for 24 yards. J.K. Dobbins, 15 carries, 44 yards. Gus Edwards, 3 carries, 9 yards. Darius Davis, that's a name, 1 carry for 8 yards. And Justin Herbert carried it 1 time but didn't gain anything out of it. We had Ladd McConkey with 3 receptions, 44 yards. Quentin Johnston with 2 receptions for 44 yards and a touchdown. We had Will Dissly with 3 receptions, 19 yards. Simi Fehoko with 1 reception, 17 yards. Hayden Hurst with 2 receptions for 15 yards. And J.K. Dobbins with 3 receptions for 10 yards. We also had Justin Fields completing 25 out of 32 of his passes for 245 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Najee Harris had 18 carries for 70 yards. Cordero Patterson had 4 carries for 33 yards. We had Justin Fields with 6 carries, 6 yards, and a touchdown. And Jaylen Warren had 3 carries for 5 yards. We had Calvin Austin with 4 receptions, 95 yards, and a touchdown. George Pickens had 5 receptions, 57 yards. Pat Freiermuth, I know I'm still saying that name wrong. I'm still trying to completely learn it. 4 receptions for 33 yards. Scott Miller had 2 receptions for 31 yards. Najee Harris had 5 receptions for 16 yards. Cordero Patterson had 3 receptions for 15 yards. Connor Hayward had 1 reception for 2 yards. And Jaylen Warren had 1 reception, but got -4 yards out of it. Then we had the Dolphins and the Seahawks, with the Seahawks win 24-3. looking exactly like how the Patriots game did. But we had Skylar Thompson, 13 completions out of 19 attempts for 107 yards. And we also had Tim Boyle with 7 completions out of 13 attempts for 79 yards. Devon Achane had 11 carries, 30 yards. Jalen Wright had 2 carries for 17 yards. Jeff Wilson Jr. had 3 carries for 14 yards. Tim Boyle had 1 carry for 6 yards. And Alec Ingold carried the ball once but got -2 yards out of it. A lot of receivers to talk about. Tyreek Hill, 3 receptions, 40 yards. Dwayne Eskridge with 1 reception, 30 yards. Devon Achane with 3 receptions, 28 yards. Jalen Waddle with 4 receptions for 26 yards. Julian Hill with 2 receptions for 24 yards. We also had Jonnu Smith with 2 receptions for 18 yards. Alec Ingold with 3 receptions for 16 yards. We had Durham Smythe, Durham Smith with 1 reception for 3 yards, and Tanner Connor with 1 reception for 1 yard. And for the Seahawks, we had Geno Smith completing 26 out of 34 passes, 289 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Zach Charbonnet had 18 carries, 91 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Kenny McIntosh with 3 carries, 11 yards, and Geno Smith carried the ball twice but got -2 yards out of it. We had DK Metcalf, 4 receptions, 104 yards, and a touchdown. Noah Fant had 6 receptions for 60 yards. Tyler Lockett had 5 receptions for 46 yards. Jackson Smith had 3 receptions for 39 yards. Zach Charbonnet had 3 receptions for 16 yards. AJ Barner had 3 receptions for 13 yards. Pharaoh Brown had 1 reception for 9 yards. And Laviska Shenault Jr. had 1 reception for 2 yards. Then we had the Panthers and the Raiders, with the Panthers win at 36-22. And Andy Dalton had a pretty good game here. 26 completions out of 37 attempts, 319 yards, and 3 touchdowns. We also had, I think it's Chuba Hubbard still. I haven't had anyone really say anything about me saying his name or anything, so I'm still going to go for it. 21 carries, 114 yards. Miles Sanders had 7 carries, 17 yards, and a touchdown. Jonathan Mingo had 1 carry for 2 yards. Andy Dalton had 2 carries but lost 2 yards because of it. We also had Deontay Johnson with 8 receptions, 122 yards, and a touchdown. Chuba Hubbard had 5 receptions, 55 yards, and a touchdown. Xavier Leggett had 2 receptions, 42 yards. Adam Thielen had 3 receptions, 40 yards, and a touchdown. We also had Tommy Tremble with 3 receptions, 29 yards. Jonathan Mingo with 3 receptions, 18 yards. Miles Sanders with 2 receptions for 13 yards. And for the Raiders side of things, we had Gardner Minshew with 18 completions out of 28 attempts, 214 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Aiden O'Connell had 9 completions out of 12 attempts for 82 yards and a touchdown. Zamir White had 10 carries, 34 yards. Gardner Minshew had 3 carries, 14 yards. And Alexander Madison had 3 carries, 7 yards, and a touchdown. We also had Trey Tucker with 7 receptions, 96 yards, and a touchdown. Jacoby Myers with 7 receptions, 62 yards, and a touchdown. Brock Bowers with 3 receptions for 41 yards. Devontae Adams with 4 receptions, 40 yards. Alexander Madison with 3 receptions for 37 yards. Amir Abdullah with 2 receptions for 13 yards. And Michael Mayer with 1 reception for 7 yards. Then we had the 49ers and the Rams, with the Rams winning at 27-24. And also, if you noticed, I changed my clothes. I took like a hour, 2 hour break from making all these, so I could catch my breath and stuff. But Brock Purdy, 22 completions out of 30 for 20 for I almost said 22 yards, 292 yards and 3 touchdowns. Jordan Mason had 19 carries for 77 yards. Purdy had 10 carries for 41 yards. And Isaac Guerendo, that's a nice name, 5 carries for 19 yards. Then we had Javon Jennings, 11 receptions, 175 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Brandon Ayuk, 5 receptions for 48 yards. Eric Saubert with 2 receptions, 41 yards. We have Ronnie Bell with 1 reception for 12 yards. Jordan Mason had 2 receptions for 11 yards. Kyle Juszczyk had 1 reception for 6 yards. And Jake Brendel had 0 receptions for 2 yards. And also, I'll mention it, Dominic Pooney had 0 receptions, but had -3 yards. And for the Rams, we had old Matthew Stafford with 16 completions out of 25 attempts, 221 yards and a touchdown. Tutu Atwell also attempted a pass, but didn't complete one. Kyren Williams, 24 carries, 89 yards, 2 touchdowns. And Ronnie Rivers, 2 carries, 9 yards. Tutu Atwell, 4 receptions, 93 yards. Demarcus Robinson, 1 reception for 32 yards. Jordan Whittington, 3 receptions, 28 yards. Kyren Williams, 2 receptions, 27 yards, and a touchdown. Colby Parkinson with 3 receptions for 21 yards. And Tyler Johnson with 3 receptions for 20 yards. Then we had the Lions and the Cardinals, with the Lions winning 20-13. We had Jared Goff, 18 completions out of 23 attempts, 199 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. We also had David Montgomery with 23 carries, 105 yards, and a touchdown. Jahmyr Gibbs had 16 carries for 83 yards. Jared Goff had 3 carries for 6 yards. And Jameson Williams had a carry but lost 7 yards out of it. We had Amon-Ra St. Brown with 7 receptions, 75 yards, and a touchdown. We had Sam Laporta with 2 receptions for 36 yards. Brock Wright with 4 receptions, 34 yards. Jahmyr Gibbs with 0 receptions, 20 yards, and a touchdown from that hook and ladder play that they had. David Montgomery had 3 receptions, 17 yards. Jameson Williams had 1 reception for 9 yards. And Tim Patrick had 1 reception for 8 yards. And for the Cardinals, we had Kyler Murray, 21 completions out of 34 attempts, 207 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Kyler Murray also had 5 carries for 45 yards. James Conner had 9 carries for 17 yards. We also had Trey Benson with 2 carries, 8 yards. And Amari Demercado with 2 carries for 7 yards. We also had Michael Wilson, 8 receptions, 64 yards. Marvin Harrison Jr., 5 receptions, 64 yards, and a touchdown. Greg Dortch with 3 receptions, 35 yards. Trey McBride with 3 receptions, 25 yards. Elijah Higgins with 1 reception, 11 yards. And James Conner with 1 reception for 8 yards. Then we had the Baltimore Ravens and the Dallas Cowboys. Ravens win this one 28-25 in a game that the Ravens really needed to win. We had Lamar Jackson, 12 completions out of 15 attempts, 182 yards, and a touchdown. Derrick Henry had 25 carries, 151 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Crazy game. Excuse me, but crazy game by him. Lamar Jackson, 14 carries, 87 yards, and a touchdown. Then we also had Justice Hill with 5 carries, 33 yards. And Zay Flowers, 1 carry for 3 yards. Got a lot of burps coming. We had Nelson Aguilar, 1 reception for 56 yards. Charlie Kolar with 1 reception, 30 yards. Rashad Bateman with 3 receptions, 28 yards, and a touchdown. Derrick Henry had 1 reception for 23 yards. Justice Hill had 2 receptions for 21 yards. Zay Flowers had 3 receptions, 20 yards. Isaiah Likely had 1 reception, 4 yards. And Mark Andrews was kind of just there. He didn't do anything. Dak Prescott, 28 completions out of 51 attempts, 379 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Then we had Rico Dowdle with 8 carries, 32 yards. Dak Prescott had 2 carries, 7 yards, and a touchdown. Ezekiel Elliott had 3 carries for 6 yards. Deuce Vaughn had 2 carries for 5 yards. And Cavante Turpin had 1 carry for 1 yard. We also had Jake Ferguson, 6 receptions, 95 yards. CeeDee Lamb, 4 receptions, 67 yards. Cavante Turpin with 3 receptions, 51 yards, and a touchdown. Sorry about that random cut. There was a very loud noise outside. But we had Jalen Tolbert with 3 receptions, 42 yards, and a touchdown. Hunter Loopkey with 2 receptions, 41 yards. We had Rico Dowdle with 3 receptions, 24 yards. Jalen Brooks had 1 reception, 24 yards. Brandon Cooks had 2 receptions for 16 yards. Deuce Vaughn had a reception for 8 yards. Ezekiel Elliott had a reception for 6 yards. Luke Schoonmaker had a reception for 5 yards. And Tyler Smith had a reception but couldn't get anything out of it. Then we had the Kansas City Chiefs and the Falcons, and Patrick Mahomes had 26 completions out of 39 attempts, 217 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. By the way, the Chiefs won this one 22-17. We had Carson Steele with 17 carries, 72 yards. Sam J. Perine with 6 carries, 25 yards. Patrick Mahomes with 6 carries for 17 yards. Xavier Worthy with 3 carries for 13 yards. And Rashee Rice with 1 carry for 1 yard. We also had Rashee Rice with 12 receptions, 110 yards, and a touchdown. Travis Kelce had 4 receptions for 30 yards. Xavier Worthy had 2 receptions for 17 yards, as well as Juju Smith, who had 2 receptions, 17 yards as well, but also had a touchdown. Sam J. Perine had 3 receptions, 15 yards. Justin Watson and Noah Gray both had 1 reception for 13 yards. And Carson Steele, 1 reception for 2 yards. For the Falcons side of things, we had Kirk Cousins, 20 completions on 19 attempts, 230 yards, a touchdown, and 8 interception. Tyler Algier, 7 carries, 32 yards. Bijan Robinson, 16 carries, 31 yards. Ray McLeod, 1 carry, 20 yards. And Kirk Cousins tried to carry it once, but lost a yard because of it. Drake London, 6 receptions, 67 yards and a touchdown. Darnell Mooney, 8 receptions for 66 yards. Kyle Pitts with 2 receptions for 59 yards. Bijan Robinson with 2 receptions, 21 yards. And Ray McLeod with 2 receptions for 17 yards. Then we had the Bills beat the Jaguars 47-10 in pretty much the highest scoring game for at least one team this week, with the Bills having 40 plus points. 3 weeks in a row that a team has had 40 plus points, with 2 weeks of those being the Saints. And now this week, we have the Bills. But we have Trevor Lawrence, 21 completions out of 38 attempts, 178 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Mac Jones also was out there, 5 completions out of 8 attempts for 22 yards. Travis Etienne Jr., 11 carries, 68 yards. D'Ernest Johnson with 2 carries, 12 yards. Tank Bigsby with 2 carries, 9 yards. And Trevor Lawrence, 2 carries, 3 yards. Christian Kirk had 8 receptions, 79 yards. Brian Thomas Jr. had 5 receptions, 48 yards. Parker Washington had 2 receptions, 18 yards, as well as Gabriel Davis. Travis Etienne Jr. had 4 receptions, 17 yards. Brenton Strange had 2 receptions, 12 yards, and a touchdown. Jose De Guerra with 1 reception, 8 yards. Luke Farrell with 1 reception for 1 yard. And Devin Duvernay had 1 reception but lost a yard because of it. Then we have the Bills side with Josh Allen, 23 completions out of 30 attempts, 263 yards, and 4 touchdowns. We also had Mitchell Trubisky out there with 1 completion out of 1 attempt for 3 yards. Josh Allen had 6 carries, 44 yards. James Cook had 11 carries, 39 yards, and a touchdown. Ray Davis had 7 carries, 22 yards, and a touchdown. We also had Ty Johnson with 3 receptions, 18 yards. We had Curtis Samuel with a carry but didn't gain anything out of it. And Mitch Trubisky had 1 carry but gained nothing, actually lost yards. And then for the receiving side of things, Khalil Shakir, 6 receptions, 74 yards, and a touchdown. James Cook, 4 receptions for 48 yards. Dalton Kincaid, 3 receptions, 41 yards, and a touchdown. Ty Johnson, 3 receptions, 28 yards, and a touchdown. Keon Coleman, 1 reception, 24 yards, and a touchdown. Curtis Samuel, 3 receptions, 22 yards. Mac Hollins with 1 reception, 16 yards. Marquez Valdes-Scantling with 1 reception, 7 yards, as well as Dawson Knox. And Ray Davis with 1 reception and 1 yard. And for the final game of the week, we had the Commanders and the Bengals, with the Commanders winning 38-33. We had Jaden Daniels completing 21 out of 23 passes for 254 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jaden Daniels also carried the ball 12 times for 39 yards and a touchdown. Austin Eckler had 3 carries, 35 yards, and a touchdown. Brian Robinson Jr. had 16 carries, 33 yards, and a touchdown. And Jeremy McNichols had 1 carry for 1 yard. Scary Terry had 4 receptions, exactly 100 yards, and a touchdown. We also had Luke McCaffrey with 3 receptions for 44 yards. Zach Ertz had 5 receptions for 38 yards. Noah Brown had 3 receptions, 29 yards. Austin Eckler had 2 receptions, 22 yards. Diami Brown, I believe his name is, 2 receptions, 16 yards. Brian Robinson, 1 reception, 4 yards. And Trent Scott with 1 reception for 1 yard and a touchdown. And for the Bengals, the last team I have to talk about for this week, until tomorrow when I do the friggin' week 4 predictions. We have Joe Burrow, 29 completions out of 38 attempts, 324 yards, and 3 touchdowns. We had Chase Brown with 7 carries for 62 yards. Zach Moss with 12 carries, 58 yards, and a touchdown. Joe Burrow had 1 carry for 4 yards. Ja'Marr Chase had 6 receptions, 118 yards, 2 touchdowns. Andre Losivas had 5 receptions, 52 yards, and a touchdown. Mike Gesicki had 4 receptions, 47 yards. Zach Moss had 5 receptions, 39 yards. T. Higgins had 3 receptions for 39 yards. Eric All Jr. had 4 receptions, 22 yards. And last but not least, Chase Brown had 2 receptions for 7 yards. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like, subscribe, comment, do really whatever you want to do. This took me way too long for me to make. But as always, I'll see you all in the next episode. See you around.